Everybody, we're about to get started here. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to City Club Missoula's June Forum, Wildfire in Missoula, Policy, Preparedness, and Planning. I'm Alex Karklins, and I have the great privilege of serving as chair of the City Club Missoula Board of Directors in 2025. Thank you all for being here today. City Club's mission is to bring together people to inform and inspire citizens on issues vital to the Missoula area community through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and the free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse, even when discussing challenging topics. Some sincere thank yous. First, let me thank Missoula Community Access Television for recording our forums as part of their media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190. You can view all of our past forums on MCAT's YouTube channel. A special thank you to our executive level sponsors, Blackfoot Communications and First Security Bank. Our executive level sponsors are key partners in helping expand audience access and public awareness of upcoming forums. We are grateful to all of our sponsors at all sponsorship levels for their generosity and advocacy for our mission. We invite you to join as a sponsor or as a member by visiting cityclubmissoula.com. Thank you to our board of directors and especially our administrator, Jenny Rohrbach, who keeps things running smoothly behind the scenes. City Club would also like to acknowledge that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people, some of whom may be present with us today at this forum. Today we honor the path they have shown us in caring for this place for generations to come. Finally, 2025 marks the 20th anniversary of City Club Missoula. Thank you to all those who have participated in our forums, provided sponsorships, and volunteered their time as board members over the years. We owe our current success to you. Now let's get on to the panelists for today's forum. We have Kimiko Barrett. She is the Senior Wildlife Research and Policy Analyst at Headwaters Economics, a nonpartisan independent research organization based in Bozeman, Montana. Kimmy is a committed agent of change in how we live with inevitable wildfires, in partnering with institutions, community leaders, local government. Okay, there we go. Hopefully this one doesn't burn out too. Okay, where was I?
You can
All right.
skip to the next.
She has research on national significance on topics such as the economics of wildfires, structural ignition vulnerabilities, building codes and land use planning, and community risk reduction strategies. Kimmy served on the Federal Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, providing key congressional policy recommendations to better address wildfire impacts. She also is the previous program director for Headwaters Economics Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire, CPAW program, working for more than 80 communities across the country to devise community-driven solutions to reduce and adapt to increased wildfire risks. Born and raised in Bozeman, Montana, she now lives in nearby Livingston and has her PhD in forestry. Greg Dillon is the director of the Fire Modeling Institute, a group focused on science application and delivery at the Missoula Fire Sciences Lab. He has been with the U.S. Forest Service for over 25 years, including time in the Southeast, the Rocky Mountains, and the Pacific Northwest. He's been at the Fire Lab since 2004. Greg has a master's degree in geography from the University of Wyoming, a bachelor's in geography from James Madison University, is a certified senior wildland fire ecologist with the Association for Fire Ecology, and has worked as a situation unit leader with the Northern Rockies Wildland Fire Management Team. Karen Hughes is the director of the Missoula County Planning, Development, and Sustainability Department. She is committed to making great places through land use planning, community development activities, climate action, and conservation efforts. She is particularly interested in public engagement and outreach, affordable housing, public infrastructure planning, and wildland fire risk reduction for communities. And finally, Adriane Beck is the director of the Office of Emergency Management, serving both the city and county of Missoula. As the director, Adriane is responsible for management of the 911 Center and Disaster and Emergency Services, and is the appointed county fire warden. So join me in welcoming our panelists for today. I think that one is recording the team. Yeah, I think.
Rejected. Okay. Okay, hi everyone. It's really great to see so many faces here this morning. And my name is Barrett. I am with Headwaters Economics, and I'll talk a little bit more about who and what Headwaters is in a moment here. But I just wanted to say before I get started, when Eric asked if I could come give a talk here on wildfire to Missoula County and Missoula City, if anybody knows anything about wildfire, that's a pretty heavy ask, and it's very humbling to be here and to speak to you all, knowing that Missoula really is one of the preeminent epicenters, not just in the country, but I would argue in the world when it comes to wildfire expertise, theory, and the advancement of so much of the research and science we know on wildfire. Really, ever since the Smoke Jumping Center was established in the early 1940s, it has really led the way in so many efforts and what we know about wildfire. So it is truly an honor. I did get my dissertation from the College of Forestry here down the street, working with the University of Montana, and it's terrific to be back and to give this in the state that I was born and raised in. I will be talking about wildfire policy research and community resilience from the larger kind of setting the stage context, what this means from a national scale, how we've traditionally approached our wildfire mitigation strategies, and what are some of the risks and impacts that we're looking at as we move forward, and setting it up really for my other panelists, Greg, Adriane, and Karen. So let's get started. I think we're saving questions towards the end. Is that right, Eric? Okay. So to begin with, turn on. Okay. So wildfire risk in Missoula is quite high. I'm not going to get into this risk per se in terms of the methodology behind it, because Greg will be getting into this momentarily. It's 96% higher wildfire risk relative to other counties in the country. We know this. We were born here or lived here for enough time to see the evidence of risk and wildfire in the community of Missoula and largely across the state. And it is growing. The way I want to talk about this is really to define what is the problem to begin with when we think through wildfire and increasing risks. Some of this will be redundant to a number of you in the audience because, again, expertise is built in and baked into Missoula, but hopefully something will stick out as a new nugget as well. What has traditionally been our response, and what is the pathway forward for this? So again, I'm with Headwaters Economics. We are an independent nonprofit research group. We're based out of Bozeman. I live next door in Livingston. We look at a variety of different issues. Wildfire is just one of them, working largely at the community scale to surface and interpret data to inform land management decision making. And again, I lead the wildfire arm of that work. And essentially what we know is wildfires are indeed burning hotter, lasting longer, and causing more damage. As a result of this, we are spending a lot of money on the impacts. The costs are increasing across the board. We're seeing this most evidently right now in insurance and within the private transfer market, as well as resources that are spent on response, recovery, and rebuilding. Right now, people are continuing to grow and build homes and develop in high-risk locations, accounting for 44 million structures that are situated in what is referenced as the wildland-urban interface, or the WUI. It's kind of a nasty acronym, but what it essentially implies is where people and settlement interfaces with wildland vegetation. These are beautiful places to live. There's a reason people want to relocate, build, and grow in these locations. But at this time, it is the fastest growing land use type in the lower 48 states, and again, accounting for more than 1 in 3 homes situated in what we call the WUI. Right now, we are looking at roughly 130,000 structures being burned or damaged by wildfire since 2005. Almost 2/3 or 65% of these have been located in the state of California alone. The risks are increasing. Right now, wildfires account for the fastest growing hazard-related damage costs in the United States, with 9 out of the 10 most expensive wildfires occurring since 2017. We also spend a lot of money on suppression. These are the costs for containing and extinguishing a wildfire. In other words, firefighting efforts, around $65.1 million per wildfire, which is doubling the cost since 1999. And we also know that these are only the costs that can be captured that a lot of the deepest impacts, both short-term and long-term, are hard to quantify, and that wildfires, like other hazards, are not equally felt by everyone. Long-standing institutional, cultural, political, economic barriers really prevent and influence the ability for different groups of people to respond to, recover, and rebuild from a wildfire. And unfortunately, we do know that the problem is only going to get worse, leading to what we see, increasing urban conflagrations, which is something that I think, Greg, are you getting into that slightly? Some of the science behind what we see out of LA, the Marshall Fire, the Camp Fire, the Lahaina Fire, and what this really implies for increasing impacts. So what has been the response traditionally? And I'm going to try and stretch the room here a little bit. So historically, wildland fires is viewed as a control problem. What we mean by that is that our suppression approach is very, very successful, and it's very, very effective. This is the containing and extinguishing of a wildfire. It really came about since the early establishment of the Forest Service in 1905, was exacerbated and really held up after the 1910 Great Fires, and really shaped how we looked at wildfire through the World War I and II era, really kind of cultivating this ideation around wildfire as being something that needed to be contained, to see it as an enemy, and kind of the projection of our fears of what this meant when you had uncontrolled wildland fire. And again, we've been quite successful at this. 98% of all wildfires are successfully contained, and it's that 2% that escape under extreme conditions that lead to the conflagrations and the disasters that we are now seeing. This is really kind of shaping what we saw with wildfire through the 1940s and 50s and the 1960s. You start to see some pushback, a lot of it coming from Forest Service researchers themselves, saying, hey, we live in a lot of fire-adapted ecosystems. Fire is an ecological process, it's an inevitability, and it is a necessity in order for our ecosystems to rejuvenate. And then you have managed fires, and you have an entire era shaped around what does this mean for wildfire and how we evolve with it. The way, I'm jumping ahead here substantially, but the way we saw this, according to great wildfire historian Steve Pine, is that the problem got defined as land and fire management issue that was being complicated by houses, when in reality, a better way to define this problem was an urban fire scene that was being complicated by the vegetation and the land around it. This is somewhat convoluted, but really the way it's captured best by Dr. Jack Cohen, a local Missoula fire expert here in town, really pivotal in terms of shaping what it meant for mitigation to homes and structures themselves, says always, if you have any familiarity with Jack's work, that this is not a wildfire problem. This is a home ignition problem. In other words, a wildfire burning in the wildlands is not where we are spending our money, and that is not where our investment and resources are being directed. It is when that wildfire comes into a community and burns homes down that becomes our priority, and that is where we are spending our money, and that is where lives are lost. So we need to define it as a problem involving homes. And if that is true, then I would argue that homes, so too, can be part of the solution. And that's what I'll be transitioning to next as part of this presentation. So this is a way forward in terms of looking at what we call risk reduction. I will be going over that, but I'll go really fast. Okay, way forward. So I will do this expeditedly. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background. This is, again, pulling from the work of RMRS researchers, Dr. Jack Cohen and others who really specialize in what we call structural ignition vulnerability, or how a home burns down in the first place. Homes burn down from one of three ways: direct flame contact, radiant heat, or embers. In other words, let's look at flame contact. This is when a burning object becomes adjacent to a non-burning object, and through that direct contact, it starts to burn. The heat and the direct flame contact. Pretty self-explanatory. We live in Montana. We all have gone camping or been through a campfire, around a campfire. The analogy, of course, is when you stick that marshmallow into direct flames, it will ignite and burn. Direct flame contact. The second way, flame radiation, also known as radiant heat. This is when a burning object releases enough BTU, enough energy, that the nearby non-flammable or combustible item ignites due simply to that amount of energy release. It's so significant, it's so substantial that it will ignite a burning structure nearby. This is what leads to structure ignition through urban settings. Once they initially ignite from largely embers, it is the radiant heat, particularly under a high wind event, that propagates spread into communities. Radiant heat is a big one. And we know that this is also the best way to roast that marshmallow, right? Up against the coals. Lastly, embers. Embers are the silent culprit behind a vast majority of home loss. Again, I will be going over that, but I'll be really fast. Okay, so embers account for 90% of all home loss during a wildfire event. They fly ahead of a wildfire 1 to 4 miles, and if they land on any flammable surface area, they have the potential to grow in size and intensity to lead to spotting. It is through the propagation of spotting that this leads to the spreading of the fire into communities, and everything that is a flammable surface area has the potential to ignite or grow. Think about what homes are built out of. Think about your home. It is probably a wood-framed structure with perhaps wood siding, perhaps a wood roof. You have wood decking material. You might have your firewood on your deck. You might have bark mulch around your house. Think about what's inside the house. Probably a lot of petroleum-based products, as we all have, appliances, furniture, carpets, electronics. When they ignite from those initial embers, that heat, again, the radiant heat, the BTU, is so significant. Under high wind event, neighboring structures can be threatened. This is what we know about the process of home ignition. And embers is when you have that puffy down coat that you just bought from REI or Patagonia, and those embers land on it, and you get those little ember holes. So embers are the silent culprit. Those are the 3 ways with which homes burn down in the first place. And you see this evidenced over and over again in post-fire analysis, in which the green vegetation is still standing while the homes themselves remain burning. And these are photographs from Dr. Cohen, so we always acknowledge him in the home ignition process. Okay, very quickly, I want to go through this video because it really captures well what I'm talking about. This is a duplex. It's been built by research partners at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. This is a duplex. It's got the same asphalt shingled roof on both sides of the duplex, same design, same layout. The left-hand side, you're seeing a home that's built with very traditional building products based here in the Intermountain West. This is modeled after a home in Park County, Montana, where I live, for example. The right side is built with the same features using non-combustible or fire-resistant materials. So let's see what happens here. We're about 10 minutes into this demonstration. Embers are being lofted at both sides of this duplex with equal velocity and speed. On the left-hand side, you can quickly see that the bark mulch surrounding the home has ignited. It's a large surface area, it's chemically treated, that's not a surprise. Under the high wind events, however, those flames are starting to spread both laterally, horizontally, and vertically. So they're moving up underneath the wooden deck, lighting it from on fire from underneath. That's going to expose the wooden door. The windows are single paned, meaning that they are likely to burst under any intense heat, allowing flames directly into the interior of the home. The flames are also climbing up the lateral side of the house, which is sided with cedar. It will climb up into that open eave space. There's vents that allow ember penetration into the attic space. Think about what's in your attic. Probably Christmas decorations, blankets, furniture, other things. And so you start to see that flame spread both, again, laterally, moving across the home into that open eave space, burning the house from the inside out. They did this 3 different times. After 10 minutes, the home on the left was entirely consumed, while the home on the right survived with minimal smoke damage. So the home on the right has fiber cement siding, again, asphalt shingled roof. It has double paned windows, which prevents that radiant heat combustion. And the deck itself is made with fire retardant wood. Very, very importantly, the gravel is non-combustible and there's no vegetation around it. We know that that is a critical step in reducing risk reduction. All right, reducing risk. And so again, if our point is to reduce risk to communities, we very much need to deliberately, strategically invest in communities. Invest in the partnerships, as Missoula Ready has done, or Wildfire Ready Missoula has done. Invest in what the county is doing and the city has done. These are the partners we need to lean into at this time when we know that there is not much support at that federal level for these types of efforts. But that will not be true forever. I genuinely believe that. This is the time we need to lean into those community efforts because they are not willing to wait for the federal inertia to catch up. because we know how to build safer, smarter, and more resilient homes. This doesn't mean we need to live in concrete bunkers. It means using the best available materials, engineering, and science to withstand a wildfire. These are the homes of the future, and this is what we all must be striving for, because we cannot solve our problems using the same thinking we used when we created them. And that's it for me. So sorry, I think it was like 12 minutes, 13 minutes?
All right, well, I'm actually glad Kimmy went over because that was a perfect setup for, I think, what I'll talk about, but probably also for Karen and Adriane too. So while they're bringing my slides up, I'll say, for those of you that registered early on and were maybe hoping to see CJ, I'm not going to be as funny as CJ probably, and I won't be representing the National Forest System, kind of low National Forest perspective, but I do work for the U.S. Forest Service at the Missoula Fire Lab. I'll be representing the perspective from Forest Service research. And as Kimmy said, with the Smoke Jump Center being here and the Fire Lab being here since 1960, Missoula has really become a hub for fire science and fire expertise internationally. And so I've felt very fortunate to work at the Fire Lab since 2004. I see some of my current and past colleagues out here in the audience. So anyway, what I am going to talk to you about is how we take the science, some of which Kimmy described to you, about how wildfire operates, and put it into simulation models, and then how we use the information from that to map wildfire hazard and risk across landscapes to help communities be better informed. So this is my sort of one-slide introduction and overview to how we map wildfire risk on a landscape. So we pull from an equation of risk that comes from the insurance industry. How do we quantify something as being at risk? Well, there's a lot of probabilities involved in it. And so we have to generate probabilistic information about the likelihood of wildfire occurring at any location. And so we do that through our simulation modeling. We also need to know something about the intensity of that wildfire when it occurs. And so we tend to measure that in flame lengths, but from the fire modeling that we do, we get a distribution of the probability of flames occurring at different lengths, different intensity levels. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly to what Kimmy was just talking about, is the bottom side of that triangle, where we need to know something about the susceptibility of the thing that is at risk. And so in this talk, we're specifically focusing on homes in the built environment. And so we can try and estimate essentially what we think the relative degree of damage or loss to a structure might be if it encounters fire of different intensity levels. To what Kimmy talked about, to some extent that's thinking about the flames themselves, but also the higher intensity fires also tend to generate more embers. And so we can think about them as also, more intense fires are going to be more of a problem to the built environment because of their ember production. So we do all that through a system of simulation models that we run on high-performance computers. That spits out spatial information, spatial data. We work with GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and we're able to pull together the information on topography, weather, fuels, run that through the fire behavior models, generate tens of thousands of iterations of potential fire perimeters, how fire might spread on the landscape under different weather conditions, and out of that we can map those probabilities that we need to calculate risk. And then we also can pull in maps and data representing where houses are or other resources and assets. We often talk about power lines and communication sites and watersheds that are important for drinking water when we're doing this kind of work as well. All right. So because we do all that work, and we've been doing it for quite some time, actually I think I skipped a slide, I did. We produce maps for the entire United States here at the Fire Lab based on that kind of information. So on the left side of the screen is our most recent map of the burn probability, the wildfire likelihood across the United States. And then on the other side of the screen is our wildfire hazard potential map, which combines the likelihood of fire occurrence and the potential intensity. And we've been producing that map every 2 to 3 years since about 2012. And it's used in a lot of different ways in federal policy. It's used to help the Forest Service prioritize their fuels management program. And so these are just some of the types of outputs that we generate. Because we've been doing that work, when Congress put in the 2018 Omnibus Appropriations Act that the Forest Service needed to produce maps and information for every community in the United States that would help them understand their wildfire risk, we were very well positioned to do that. And so we created a really great team. We partnered with Kimmy and her colleagues at Headwaters, and Joe Scott, who's here today, and his colleagues with a local Missoula company called Pyrologics. And we worked together on this project to take the work that we had done and map wildfire risk nationwide, and then summarize that up for every community, county, tribal area, and state in the nation, and put it on this website, wildfirerisk.org. Headwaters did a great job of helping us build a really user-friendly, intuitive website, and our target audience with that is really the public, but we want the information to be absorbed by folks like local elected officials, like our county commissioners, land use planners, fire managers, local fire collaboratives. And so I'll give you some examples of what that information looks like. So we all know that this January, Los Angeles had some pretty significant fires. And what I'm showing up here is our map that we produced and put on the website last year in 2024 for Altadena, California, showing that Altadena had basically greater risk than any other community nationwide. And if I go to this next slide, this is from January 10th of this year in the bold black line, and I don't know how well you all can see it, but is the fire perimeter of the Eaton fire that was burning, and that's overlaid on what we call our risk to homes map. And you can see that, hopefully you can see in here, the fire perimeter actually tracks very closely to the area we mapped as the highest risk. The other thing that you can see as you get down into the community is our fire modeling works in the wildland environment. It does not work in the built environment. We don't have models that do a good job of transitioning fire spread from the wildlands to the built environment. So for this project, what we did to solve that was using GIS techniques. We spread our hazard and risk data into the built environment using a decay function so that it decreases as you get into the community, and we spread that hazard and risk about a mile. But what's striking about this perimeter from Altadena, and we've done it with Lahaina, we've done it with the Marshall Fire, we've done it with others, almost always our area that we map as having some level of wildfire risk matches where that fire reaches in those built environment settings. And so from that, this spring, we were getting a lot of media inquiries after the LA fires. We were getting them at the fire lab, and so was Headwaters. And we said, well, why don't we take a look at all of the data layers that we produce, and we can probably identify what the characteristics were in some of those communities that had those urban wildfire conflagrations. So this is on the internet. Headwaters produced this article and published it, and the map over there shows, and again, it's hard to see in this lighting, but there are some dark spots on there that are places that have had those urban wildfire disasters in recent years. And then we found two of our spatial data sets that we produce that did a really good job of sort of defining, if we looked at thresholds of the percentile of those things, the upper left corner of that plot, or the upper right corner for you all, identified where those urban wildfire disasters occurred, and then we said, what are, out of the 32,000 plus communities nationwide, what are the other communities that fit those same criteria? And that's what we have mapped over there on the other side. Missoula, Montana, as you might suspect, is one of those communities. And so basically that's a way of saying any one of those communities could experience something on the scale of what we've seen in LA and Lahaina and other places like that. Here's a quick look at, if you go to our website right now, and actually, Kimmy, I noticed your statistic was 96. We just recently updated this with new census data and reran our summary, so now Missoula is at the 92nd percentile. But this is what you'll see when you go to the website for Missoula, and then we also have interactive charts where you can kind of see how your community compares to other communities across the country. And then more importantly, we don't want to just show people that they have risk. We want to help them then understand what they can do to start taking action. And so I like this table because it kind of shows that there are multiple ways that we can tackle this issue of reducing wildfire risk. On the one side, and if you notice on the bottom, it says land management agencies underneath it. There are lots of things that agencies like the Forest Service, BLM, Park Service, state land management agencies can do. We can do fuels treatments like prescribed burning and mechanical thinning. We can have strategic wildfire response. We can have prevention programs that reduce unwanted ignitions, and we can have education and outreach campaigns. But really, where the rubber meets the road and where it's very important is on the other side, and you can see the responsibility on the bottom, is local government and citizens. And that is home hardening, defensible space, land use planning, things like that. And so last year when we updated our data on the website, we also produced this layer that we call Community Wildfire Risk Reduction Zones. And what we tried to do here was essentially map out the areas where homes would be in direct flame contact versus where they would be susceptible to embers versus where they're far enough into the center core area of that community that they're far from the embers and less likely to be impacted. And so we actually tried to map that out and then make connections to what are the most relevant mitigation actions that you can do in each one of those zones. And then just very quickly, I'll click through these. We have this ability on there for you to select what your role is, because I think the key thing to remember about this is everybody has a role to play in wildfire risk mitigation. And so if you say, I'm a land manager, it's going to highlight the risk reduction categories that are most relevant to you. So you'll notice it has fuels management, response, land use planning, preventing ignitions. But if I say, well, I work in emergency services, I'm Adriane. Then what are the things that maybe are in my purview? And you'll see there's some different things highlighted: evacuation and readiness, smoke readiness, land use planning again. If I'm a planner and a developer, like Karen, what things are in my purview? Again, land use planning and evacuation and readiness, but also helping people make their homes more ignition resistant. And then even homeowners. Focusing on your home, your property, making yourself smoke ready, thinking about your evacuation plan, doing your part to prevent ignition. So we're trying to really help connect people to the most relevant actions that they can take. And yeah, with that, I'm going to hand over the microphone to our county folks. So thank you.
All right, I'm Karen Hughes. I'm the Director of Planning, Development, and Sustainability for Missoula County. And thankfully, Kimmy and Greg covered most of the important stuff about why we're in this business. Essentially, it comes down to the same things you've already heard. Wildland fire is inevitable. It's essential. Locally, we value our homes and neighborhoods, and we value the landscapes. That's why we're here. We know that a lot of the efforts have been really focused on wildfire response and fuel treatments as a proxy for protecting communities, and yet that's not the whole story. The science tells us there's more to be done. There's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we can do individually, and there's a lot that we need to do at the community levels to increase our efforts to reduce exposure and to reduce risk, particularly of home ignitions. So where to begin? I'm a planner. I use the planning tools. So I'm going to make you come along that ride with me. The basis for what county government gets involved in, we set our priorities through policy. So we use our pre-disaster mitigation plan. Adriane's going to talk a little bit about that, and the community wildfire protection plan, which is really honed in on the wildfire question. As Greg said, there's updated risk mapping out there, and we need to bring that down to the local level and have those community conversations about what that information means and what we can do with it. What strategies should we be looking at to improve community resilience? We need to collaborate with the city and the county together with all of the land management agencies, but all the homeowners associations and community councils and neighborhood councils. And this is where we start to shift from past activities. Historically, community wildfire protection plans have really been, they came out of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act of 2003, and they've been really focused on that land management side of things and safe and effective response. And although community protection and community resilience has always been part of it, we haven't really delved into all of the opportunities this tool provides to really start thinking about how we make our communities, our neighborhoods, and our individual homes more resilient in the face of wildfire. So that's where we need to have a lot of community conversations and start talking about what strategies we're really willing to take on at the neighborhood level and at the community level to help reduce risk and to increase our resilience in the face of wildfire. And that doesn't mean that we don't also need healthy forests. We do, and we need the treatments that help provide healthy landscapes. And it doesn't mean that we ignore response. We still need that as well. We just need to amp up our level in the world of community resilience. And then we need to take that information and use it to guide land use policy. The city just adopted their land use plan, and they're embarking on their codes project, and they have used the information available to date to help guide their thinking in where to grow. The county is in the position where we're going to be starting a community wildfire protection plan while also starting a land use plan, and so we'll be using this updated updated community wildfire protection plan to help guide our land use strategy for the county. This is the biggest piece for reducing exposure, thinking about where we grow and how we manage growth, kind of trying to prevent getting too much density in areas where there's high fire hazard. When you have a certain density of housing and high hazard, that's when you get the potential for conflagration and community-wide destruction. And that's one of the things we're really trying to prevent. Also, we need to, we have thousands of homes already across our landscape and a lot of need to provide more homes. We're in the middle of a housing crisis. There's an expectation in planning that we're going to provide opportunities for housing and for jobs, as well as managing not just the risk of wildfire, but other risks like flood and taking care of other values like agriculture and wildlife. So we have to balance all those values and create that map that guides where growth occurs and hopefully helps reduce risk of exposure to wildfire while also balancing that out with the other values. But then we also need to look at what we can do with the existing homes and the future homes. How do we reduce risk of structure ignitions and other risks as well, like wildfire smoke? And take that information both from the Community Wildfire Protection Plan and our land use plan to inform other initiatives. Parks and open space planning is a piece of that puzzle. Climate adaptation planning and leveraging what we do in the realm of wildfire with other events or other things that we're doing to become more resilient in the face of climate change. Thinking about community planning, community facilities planning and siting and design, thinking about infrastructure planning. All these things can be tied together, and we can use our Community Wildfire Protection Plan and our land use plan to inform them. And then we need to implement the plan. Both the city and the county have had lots of plans. We have a long history of planning, but we are kind of on the cusp of really getting to the point of doing a really good job on implementing those plans. So that's a big piece of the puzzle as well. So I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper on risk reduction and the things that we can use our land use planning to do. We take that mapping that, again, we use for community wildfire protection plans, which we're thinking there broadly about landscape resilience, we're thinking about response, and we're thinking about community resilience. And here we need to drill down and think about what is the information that we need to help figure out how to prioritize our resources to make sure that we're doing what we can to make our communities resilient. So we're going to need to take that mapping and further adjust it. Always there's the need for education. And then we need to think about the fact that we need to prepare for new construction, and there's a different toolbox maybe for that, as well as existing homes and businesses. So for new construction, we use the subdivision regulations. Those are the regulations that guide the layout of development, the infrastructure that serves it, and can do some level of vegetation management, but they're not the best proxy for dealing with where you put density and other types of things like structure hardening. We can use our zoning regulations. That can help implement where we grow and how we manage growth, and implement that land use plan that way. They can also take care of site design issues. They can help guide infrastructure, such as water supply, and they can also help us determine access needs. And also provide the details on landscaping and vegetation management. And then our building codes, that's really the only tool the county has to ensure that that new construction is hardened in preparation for wildfire. And we have to put those all together. In the state of Montana, we have kind of a hodgepodge of statutory authorities, and so we have to kind of pull together the right package for Missoula County and the city of Missoula. And then for programs for existing homes and businesses, and these need to go hand in hand with the regulatory programs. Adriane's going to talk about the wildfire mitigation program and some ideas around home retrofits. And then the threat is not just, the risk that we don't need to mitigate is not just from the wildfire destroying homes, whether individually or in the community, but it's also smoke. Smoke will be here whether we're doing prescribed burning in the spring or in the winter, well, spring and the fall, or it's here during wildfire season. And so clean indoor air is important too, and we need to be planning for that as well. So those are the takeaway messages. We need to really increase our emphasis on reducing exposure by figuring out where and how we grow, and improving the safety for homes and businesses by figuring out how to construct them better and retrofitting the ones that are out there. We need to really collectively improve our understanding of risk, and we need to get to work and try things. Put some resources behind it. It means trying stuff. It means adapting and learning and then repeating and trying new things.
Okay, well, that's coming up. So my name is Adriane Beck. I'm the director for the Missoula Office of Emergency Management, as indicated, serving both the city of Missoula as well as the county. We oversee 911 as well as disaster and emergency services, and within disaster and emergency services, we have a dedicated wildfire mitigation program, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. But just kind of emergency management 101, our role is to be that coordinating entity when we have large-scale disasters or emergencies that overwhelm any single agency or entity. So outside of that single 911 call, outside of that one-day event, our role is to really work with all of our cooperators and stakeholders in the community to make sure that we have the incident command structure that is warranted for that particular event, as well as to ensure that we have common objectives, we're using all of our resources appropriately, and so whether that's a wildfire or a severe storm or COVID or any of those other things, that's really the role that we play. But wildfire is the #1 hazard that we face in western Montana, but Missoula County specifically. We know that not just because of anecdotal, looking at where we live in the world and all of the data that you've heard from today. We update our pre-disaster mitigation plan every 5 years. What a pre-disaster mitigation plan does is it looks at our specific spot on the map. It looks at our past occurrence and history of hazards, of large-scale incidents, and we go through a rank and profile of those hazards to determine what has happened in the past, what is likely to occur in the future, what is the susceptibility of our community to that particular hazard. And that's important in that we're looking at wildfire in relation to the other things that we are susceptible to, flooding being one, severe drought, severe weather, all of those things. Wildfire continues to come out as #1. What that does for our office is it gives us the justification for how we allocate resources, time and effort, minimal resources to maximum effect, And so after 2 years, 2 successive years of updating our pre-disaster mitigation plan, we now have a wildfire mitigation program that's unique in Montana as far as living within, having a dedicated county level office that's all they do, 365. Because as I mentioned, we face a lot of different hazards, a lot of different big events that can occur at any point in time. And so our role as emergency management is to be looking at the entire landscape of everything, but then also looking at what are we most likely to face, what is going to be the most consequential in our community, and how do we dedicate resources 365 days of the year to helping our community prepare for that. Again, it's not just anecdotal. If you look at where we live relative to the rest of the country, you can see that bright or dark, if you want to call it that, spot that is over the top of Missoula County. Again, not obvious to anyone in this room. This one is a little darker, maybe a little bit harder to see, but as Karen alluded to, whether or not we have a wildfire risk or a risk to losing homes from wildfire, we have very unhealthy air. We are very susceptible to wildfire smoke. Again, if you look at us relative to the rest of the country, you can see that blood clot that is over Missoula County, and you all live here. You all know that, and so we have to think about, not only preventing and preparing for the wildfires that are going to occur in our community, we also have to have that same mindset in how do we prepare for clean indoor air? How do we look at the infrastructure that we have? How do we help educate the public to ensure that they can have healthy air throughout the entire year? So we've talked a lot about kind of planning for wildfire. I want to make sure that if you take away nothing from what I have to say today, take away this, okay? If we started from scratch today and built out the city of Missoula and Missoula County, we would do it differently than it exists today. We wouldn't have large populations in drainages with one way in and one way out. We wouldn't have homes that have cedar shake shingles. We wouldn't have vegetation that is right up next to houses. We wouldn't have density without some kind of building code to prevent that house-to-house conflagration that's the reality that we have today. So we would do things differently, but we're here today, right? So in the event that we can do all of the things that you've heard about, that we can educate the public, that we can implement mitigation programs, and we can harden our homes, and we can build better and build smarter in the future, that's fantastic. But we still have a reality today. And so when an emergency occurs, our best tool is being able to communicate with you to let you know that it's going on and to provide you with directions to protect yourself, your home, and your family. Smart 911, smart911.com. Go there today, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell 10 people. That's how you need to register for emergency alerts. When and if we have a wildfire that threatens homes, that cuts off evacuation or ingress and egress, where the public, people, are in harm's way, this is how we're going to communicate with you. This is how we're going to tell you what's going on. This is how we're going to tell you if you are under an evacuation warning, meaning a heads up, time to think about going, or an evacuation order. It's time to go right now. Sign up, smart911.com. Okay, this is probably the biggest question I get is about evacuations. As we just talked about, look any direction in this valley and you will find a one way in, one way out with lots of homes in that area. So evacuation is a big deal. Sign up for emergency alerts, okay, so that we can give you as much advance notice as possible, so that we can plan what that evacuation needs to look like, so that we can give you good instructions about what to do. But you have a big piece of that too. Be prepared to evacuate, okay? Think about what they call the 6 Ps of preparedness for evacuation. Think about your people and your pets. Where are you gonna go? Do you have a friend? Are you gonna go to a hotel? Are You going to leave town? You going to go camp? Are you going to go to an evacuation shelter that we open up? Okay. Bring your critical papers and phones, prescriptions, pictures and irreplaceable memorabilia, personal computer with a hard drive so you can access all of that critical stuff, and then plastic, right? If you're going to be out of your home for a little bit of time, or cash. Think about how you're going to take care of your family, your friends, and your critical needs. I oftentimes say that it's not emergency management, it's expectations management, okay? And so when we think about evacuations, when we think about wildfire, that's our job, is to help set that expectation as to what that's going to look like so that we don't have people that are surprised by that. And I hope that none of you are surprised by the fact that we have a wildfire risk in Missoula County and in Missoula City. And so the preparations that you do today around, being prepared to take proactive action to protect your house and your safety and your loved ones, that's really key. But the other piece is, let's not be in that situation, right? Let's take the time now in blue sky days to understand our risk, to harden our homes, to take care of our property, to take care of our neighbors. Oftentimes in these higher density areas, your risk is your neighbor's risk. And so work together. As was mentioned by Kimmy, is Wildfire Ready Missoula County, partnership with United Way. We have all kinds of resources there. But one of the most important things is to request a risk assessment. That wildfire mitigation program that we have mitigation specialists that will come out to your home. They'll do a site assessment with you. They'll talk about all the things that you could do, some of them very low cost, to prove your home's survivability, reduce your home's ignitability by looking at where are embers likely to collect on your property. How can you do these really simple things to help your home survive a wildfire? And then there is some handouts over here on the table on the way out. We have our Wildfire Preparedness Guide in partnership with so many of you that are in the room today, whether DNRC, U.S. Forest Service, I mentioned United Way. Lots of really good information in there about how to prepare for evacuations, but also how to make your home fire ready. Thank you.
All right, everybody. We're going to take a break for about 10 minutes. During which time we're going to ask you to participate in Table Talk, which is kind of the heart and soul of City Club. So get to know your neighbors at your table, formulate a question, and appoint somebody to ask that question. And so basically, here are the rules of engagement up on the screen right now. So you have 10 minutes. Decide on one person. Keep your questions respectful. Avoid making long statements if you can. Avoid multi-part questions if you can. And any members of the media, you can ask questions at the end of the forum itself. So we'll see you and maybe a little bit after 12:15. Okay. And as we mentioned before, there's information at the entrance right here as well if you want to take some of that. All right. See you soon. Okay, everybody, we are about ready to reconvene. I can feel lots of great questions being formulated out in the audience right now. So, without further ado, let's get into it. We will have two board members around the room with microphones. So if you're ready to ask your question, get your appointed question asker to raise their hand. Stand up, introduce yourself. Briefly and ask your question, and our panelists will answer them. So with that, let's get started.
Right here.
Oh, thank you. Okay, our question has to do with evacuation notices and understanding that not everyone has access to smartphones. What other avenues are there for getting emergency alerts, either via radio, TV, or elsewhere?
I had a plant out in the audience to ask that question because I didn't have enough time to get into it in my presentation. Thanks for that. Yes, so emergency alerts, again, go smart911.com, sign up. You can choose how you want to receive those alerts, whether it's a voice call, a text message, or an email, or all three. But then we also have the ability in those real severe situations where we have an imminent threat of death, essentially. I'll be blunt. We can leverage what they call the Integrated Public Alerts and Warning System. For those that are as old as me or older will remember the traditional EAS, Emergency Alert System, the duck quack that goes across local broadcast networks, the crawl that comes across the bottom of local broadcast television. That's the old EAS system. We have access to trigger those alerts through that, but because we are in this more modern day of technology, now they call it the Integrated Public Alerts and Warning System. Anyone who's ever received an Amber Alert on your phone, that's what that is that's the wireless emergency alert system coupled with the emergency alert system to bring all of those different technologies into one portal so that when we have those highest acuity of emergency alerts, we can trigger that system, which will then broadcast that over local broadcast channels. It will broadcast over no weather radio, and it will also initiate those wireless emergency alerts. It will also, if you're in Smart 911, you'll get those as well. Smart 911 allows us to be a little bit more targeted, a little bit more granular in what those alerts look like. So in a wireless emergency alert, okay, in that Integrated Public Alerts and Warning System, our boundaries are the entire county, okay? So if we have an evacuation occurring in Seeley Lake and you're sitting here in this room, you're gonna get it. We're also limited to how specific we can be in that description, in that we have a character count, because we're forcing alerts onto people's phones. We're forcing wireless carriers to push those alerts through. So we're confined with the amount of characters that we have, which means we can't be as specific as we want to be. And so having you opt into emergency alerts is the best way to get alerts that are specific to your home, your address, and give you the most detail.
Jim Noon, we discussed, a lot of the discussion was around individual property mitigation. What efforts are there for all these Patty Creek, Miller Creek, all these drainage areas for remediation? I know it's gone back and forth on being able to do burns because of health concerns and all that. But there's people at our table live in that area, and they see nothing done, a lot of dead trees, so on. What about area mitigation?
Under Montana law, we can require all new home construction to meet requirements and put those things in place for new development. But when it comes to mitigation for existing homes, we have to use the programs like the Wildfire Mitigation Program and start working with neighborhood organizations and communities to try and stand those up. There really isn't another mechanism that I know of. We try and bolster those with cost share and education and outreach, but that's pretty much.
The question is not individual homes. That's the whole forested area that they live in.
I suppose I can only represent the federal land piece of that, and so, I don't know, well, Adriane, I don't know if you can represent kind of some of the county and state level mitigation work that happens on our public lands here within the county.
I will try. We have, as was mentioned, we have our Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which is a collaborative effort with all of our land management agencies, the city and the county, to prioritize areas for mitigation based, and that priority of mitigation is not only the individual homeowners, where we have a role to try to help incentivize that, but also for our land management agencies to look at where their priority treatment areas should be. And there are a whole host of reasons as to why projects maybe take a long time to implement versus those that can happen pretty quickly. I'm not prepared to speak about federal policy and those kinds of things, but that opportunity for all of us to sit in a room and say that these are our priorities as a community exists, and that's that process of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan.
Am I on? Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Eva. I work at the Fire Lab with Greg, but also a citizen here for 30 years. So at our table, we talked a little bit about question for Karen mainly, and that is, what are the barriers that you're finding, and how can you get help to move past the barriers to actually implement or getting the planning encoded, getting the things you want to see done as far as wildfire mitigation regulations. What are the barriers to that? And what? It just seems like, well, living here for as long as I haven't seen a lot of change in kinds of like attitudes or regulations. I'm just wondering what's hard for you. How do you need help? How does the political members of the community help? How do those people help you? How does the public help you? And how does the public know about how to start helping you?
Right. It's a great question. Essentially, county commissioners and city council have the duty and authority to adopt codes, but that comes from its citizenry. So the community as a whole has to be willing to accept regulation, and so that's part of having that conversation is without understanding the problem and understanding the risk and talking about what the strategies are, those being including regulation, it's really hard for county commissioners or city council members to go ahead and add new regulations. And especially in a time when we are, and it has been in Missoula for a long time, facing a lot of pressure to put new housing on the ground and not make it cost anymore and not restrict it any more than is absolutely necessary. So some of this is around the mapping and figuring out where we apply codes. We typically want to do the least necessary. We don't want to overregulate. And then figuring out how to do it and how to put together the package. The statutes are a little bit squirrely in Montana for how we do that. And then we have to deal with the different communities. In the city of Missoula and the Missoula urban area, it's a different set of conversations than with the more rural areas of the county where there's a lot less interest in having government intervention in their lives. So that's part of the triangulation as well. And to be honest, in Missoula County, we haven't gone through a land use map update to cover the entire county since the 1970s, since the original land use map was put into place. So we need to go through the process that we're embarking on now, which is to create our growth management plan for the entire county. The city's a step ahead of us there, and the county has done a land use map update for the urban area, so we are ahead in the game there, but for the rest of the county and covering places like Sealy Lake and Lolo, where we probably have enough development density where we could see a higher propensity for conflagrations, that's going to need to be part of that conversation as well. So participating in Community Wildfire Protection Plan, participating in land use planning, it's interesting. We don't get a lot, the county commissioners and staff don't see a lot of people coming to meetings to say, yeah, we're in support of this. I think that's changed a bit, but that's what needs to happen.
Just adding to that, a little bit more from my perspective just as a citizen here, and I live in the Rattlesnake, one of those one way in, one way out communities. Jen Hensek, who used to be the district ranger here on the Missoula district of the Lolo, used to talk about spark plugs in a community as those people, those community members who sort of take the initiative to rally their neighbors in their community and maybe provide an example, get the ball rolling. And I participated in a couple field tours that she led when she was trying to gain support for the Wildfire Adapted Missoula effort. And it was really motivating to see how one individual or a couple individuals coming together and maybe doing some work that then they can demonstrate to their neighbors, like, hey, this is what it looks like to be wildfire adapted, to be a little bit more ignition resistant. And then that gives people the opportunity to see what that looks like. So even without the regulations, even without the stick, there's a lot of carrot out there. And there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for individuals to provide those examples, so that I imagine when county commissioners and others are considering the support, you can kind of look at that and try and build support that way.
Hi, I'm Amy Sullenberg with Climate Smart Missoula, and our table talked a little bit about, I guess, some of those carrots. Given that everybody has a role to play, what are some of the financial incentives for landowners to reduce their, their burn ignition zone and things, and where might people find that information? Just elaborate a little bit on some of that financial. And then Susan Hay-Patrick mentioned something about a great website at United Way of Missoula County that maybe she wanted to be announced.
Okay, had to wait for the green light to come on. Yes, go to Wildfire Ready Missoula County, and there you can get a home assessment. As I mentioned, we'll have one of our mitigation specialists come out, meet with you on site, and that mitigation specialist may come from DNRC or Missoula County, but all have the same message, all use the same prescription as when they're looking at your home from a ignitability standpoint, and the recommendations are the same. We do have grant funding available through our office that helps incentivize homeowners to do some of this work. Most of the grant funds that we have available are a 75-25 cost share, so 75% of the funding necessary to do that defensible space around your home can be covered with a grant, and then that 25% is what the homeowner is on the hook for. That can be in kind, but most of the time it's with cash as they hire a contractor to do that work. We are in the process of trying to look at other grant programs that would allow us to do some structural retrofits light to homes, and that outside of that defensible space, really looking at that 0 to 5 ring around the home, and how we can incorporate some landscaping techniques to, again, reduce the ignitability of those homes. Did I answer your question?
I would just add to this too, because it's part of the conversation when you talk about the financial piece, is that, can I just ask, has anybody gotten a flyer from your insurance company talking about risk yet? Okay, that's amazing, and well done, Missoula homeowners, for that. What we're seeing in terms of the rhetoric and the trends at the national scale, and particularly in the West, as you've seen in California, and it's really starting to kind of have cascading implications right now to the other Western states, is with respect to coverage, retainment, and ongoing premium for houses located in high-risk areas. So if you now, as a homeowner, or more collectively at that HOA level or neighborhood scale, whatever you may fall into, can demonstrate to your insurance providers that you are taking proactive risk reduction measures, whether through landscaping, defensible space, to the structure itself, and can communicate that to your insurance provider, now may be the time to do so, because it is on the forefront of what is coming to Montana, guaranteed. Coming out of Montana, living in Gallatin County, well, now I'm in Park County, but working with partners in Big Sky, there are many, many homes located in Big Sky that cannot get coverage. If you cannot get coverage, you cannot get a mortgage. So there are direct implications when you start thinking through what this means at local municipal level for not just the housing market, but fun fact, insurance providers actually purchase 70% of municipal bonds with the guaranteed return on that investment. If they cannot do so through lost property value, that will impact what local budgets can afford as well. So now is the time to do some of that initial work on your home and property and communicate it with your insurance provider as well. And your neighbors, because the insurance providers really actually want to see it at a collective. They know all of what we talked about. They know this. And they are ready for kind of spreading that risk as much as they can. So that would be another thing to think through.
Hi, thanks to all the presenters. Following up on something similar related to economics. One of the things we talked about is the balance between affordability of housing and the cost of either retrofitting a house or building with new codes that might have more expensive building materials like concrete board versus wood.
Yeah, and I can answer that question based off of research we've done, but then would field it through anybody else on this panel. So 2 different questions. One is with respect to new construction and one is with respect to an existing structure. And so when you talk about housing costs or building materials for new construction, this can be done actually quite affordably, because what you're talking about is a substitution of materials, and what you need to look at is a holistic unit of a house from top down, a new build. So you're looking at all the exterior components of a home. The way we break this down from a structural mitigation perspective is near home landscaping, or that non-combustible zone 0 to 5 feet from a structure, the decking material, the exterior walls, windows, doors, eaves, and roof. So when you look at that as a collective system and you're replacing traditional, more flammable products like wood shake shingle, like cedar siding, like a wood deck, like bark mulch, like a single pane window, and you substitute it for more resistant building material, then those costs as a whole are relatively equivalent. And what we saw for a home spec in Park County was that it was an actual price reduction of 2%, because an asphalt roof actually complies with Class A wildfire resistant. It's not going to be as resistant as, say, a metal roof, but it's certainly better than a wood shake roof. Wood siding is really expensive. It looks beautiful. It's really expensive. Fiber cement, our hardy plank, is actually cheaper, much more affordable, and has a long-term maintenance and durability. Bark mulch, you're looking at replacing that with rock gravel or non-combustible surface. That's going to be a little bit more, but again, a lot more durable. And I always call out the example of Livingston. Everybody knows incredibly high winds. My parents just purchased a home that was 5 years old and had me assess it. And I looked at it and I was like, it's beautiful. It's built entirely for wildfire resistant. You have bark mulch, you have fiber cement siding, all the check, enclosed eaves. And the architect said it had nothing to do with wildfire. It was because of high winds. So they have a lot of mutual benefits. This is, again, for new construction. Retrofits are super tricky and super sticky because you're dealing with legacy issues and site-specific conditions that influence ignition vulnerability. For example, if you have an RV on your property, that is a fuel package. If you have a barn or a structure nearby that is a shed or anything that is a flammable burning object, that is considered a source of fuel during fire. So you need to address that. You need to address slope, terrain, how close is your neighbor. Are there wooden fences connecting you? Because that is a wick from their house to your house. Is there shrubs? Are there hedges? All of this collectively needs to be considered for retrofit. It makes it really messy. But even then, what we have shown is the most effective, some of the most effective, I would say, mitigation measures are also the most cost affordable. And this is things like vent replacement. You can buy flame and ember resistant vents that actually limit the amount of ember intrusion in those attics, in the foundational vents, in the soffits. You can do things like just metal flashing that would prevent the ignition from your siding to your decking surface area. So you can do things like that that go a long way in reducing your structural ignitability from a fire. And then you can go all the way up to full-scale retrofit, fiber cement siding, metal roof, all of that. And then you're looking at more of a scale, 60,000 upwards to 100,000. But a lot of the more low-hanging fruit, I would say anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000. And if there's a cost share available, that would bring that cost down even further. Anybody have anything to add?
Hello, I'm Allie. I'm with the Climate Action Program with Missoula County. My table was talking about how about half of our community members are renters. I myself am a renter, so I think about this all the time when I'm in conversations like this. I feel very vulnerable as a renter because I'm not in control of my house or my apartment building, and also feel like pretty powerless in terms of having my home be part of climate solution or wildfire risk solution. And so our table was wondering if or how y'all are prioritizing outreach to rental homeowners with information and resources on home hardening and retrofits.
I guess I would say that no, I don't know that there's a specific outreach or target for landlords or for individuals who are renting, though I think our messaging is geared to everyone, and it is based on kind of that parcel's risk, irrespective of if they are a landlord or a property owner, but we should collaborate on maybe some more ways in which we can reach that audience.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for everything you do around this. Just wanted to say that from our table. And our question is actually more about what may happen after an event. I think we talked a lot about how to prepare and mitigate and try to prevent that. But we've seen a few examples now of terrible events that cause mass displacement. And we were wondering what is kind of the conversation around that and how to protect for the community and people that may be displaced and maybe, and recognizing that there is an opportunity for redevelopment and whatnot that can come out of something like a mass fire event.
I'll attempt to talk through that, and certainly we'll invite the others to chime in. And that when we talk about the 4 phases of emergency management, obviously there's the mitigation and the preparedness and the response, but then there's also the recovery. And when a community is impacted, certainly when we have a massive reduction of our housing stock, the economic impacts of that are huge, but then also how do we repopulate the area, even if it's just a short-term evacuation or displacement of our residents. So that repopulation planning, as well as those economic impacts when we have a community that's been impacted, certainly is kind of coordinated through our office. Depending on the scale and scope, obviously there are federal entities that come to the table, whether that's FEMA or in many cases there are grant opportunities available post-fire that help with some of the restoration of the landscape. But it's a huge problem. I mean, certainly anyone who followed the fires in Lahaina with their problem as far as the number of people that were displaced from that and thinking about how do they stay within that community. But then also just looking at some of the examples out of the California fires, and that, water quality is impacted and big decisions need to be made as to how that community rebuilds in a way that makes them more resilient to it in the future.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add too, I showed in my slides some of the examples of categories of actions that are most relevant to different community members, and one that I didn't refer to but is on there is recovery and rebuilding. And so we do on the Wildfire Risk Community site have some information and some resources about some of the things Adriane mentioned and maybe whose responsibility it is in different phases of that recovery and rebuilding and what some of those elements are. And then, the other thing that I think, anyone who's paid attention to the news following the events like what happened in LA, there seems to always be a bit of a debate about getting people back into their homes as quickly as possible, rebuilding as quickly as possible, excuse me, versus taking the opportunity to maybe do it right. And, like Adriane said a little while ago, if we were to design Missoula from scratch today, we wouldn't do it the way we did before. And yet there's often sort of that time pressure to get people back into their homes and back to normal as soon as possible. So it's very challenging to implement change, and particularly different codes in that time space. But if you can, it definitely is an opportunity, like Kimmy said, building an ignition resistant home from the ground up is actually quite affordable compared to retrofit. So lots of trade-offs and complications.
So I guess the one thing I'd add is that that's a place that, while we're not in that situation, and using our pre-disaster mitigation planning and our community wildfire protection planning, where we can tackle some of those issues and kind of create a strategy around those things in our communities, so that we are more prepared. It still will be hard, obviously, but the idea would be that we have a plan for how to build back stronger.
Matt Arno with DNRC. Kimmy, you've obviously done a lot of work in this space, especially around the construction materials and that sort of thing, yet we're still not adopting it. What do you think it'll take to change our culture so that we really just do it? It's really not that hard, right? It can be done for the same cost and for other good reasons, as you pointed out, including wind.
Thanks, Matt, and good to see you. Yeah, so in the wildfire community, we've all heard it, and it's thrown out a lot, and it's a cliche, but they say the social, cultural paradigm shift. In that, what does it truly mean to live with wildfire, particularly in the West and in locations like Montana that are fire-adapted ecosystems? Our ecosystems are meant to burn on a rotating fire regime, and we have forgotten that. And it was held true by indigenous cultures. They intentionally practiced prescribed burning for the benefit of hunting and cultivation and agricultural purposes, and that is a forgotten past to us. So Jessica Haas, a former colleague I know, both Eva and Greg, always says it's not so much learning to live with fire, it's relearning how to live with fire. And so when you follow like a historian like Stephen Pine and how he traces this across, we got to this point of really kind of a fearing fire because it is destructive. And we have been able to so effectively control and suppress it. And now it is a baked-in assumption that we will continue to do so and put others at risk in the protection of our homes and our structures. You would be called crazy if you asked somebody to stand in front of your house for an oncoming flood or for sea level rise or for a hurricane. And yet we assume this over and over and over again when it comes to wildfire and the protection of our structures. And so until we really get over that social, cultural, and I'm going to say it, paradigm shift in our assumptions of what it means to live with fire, it's going to be a hard battle, because once we get over that, then we're going to start seeing the investment needed, because there's going to be enough political pressure built up to actually structurally and deliberately invest in what we have all been talking about. Right now, unfortunately, at the federal scale, with the exception of only one grant I can think of, the Community Wildfire Defense Grant that's housed within USDA, there is no funding available for communities and local jurisdictions to do this critical work. And even CWDG has, this is the Community Wildfire Defense Grant, has limitations for home hardening efforts. It's a really tricky discipline to get into, because you're talking about fusing urban engineering and planning, structural engineering skills, hazard resiliency with wildfire and fire ecology behavior. So it's an interdisciplinary field. It's not well cultivated. No single agency takes it on super well. FEMA's been stripped. U.S. Fire Administration's been stripped. And nobody knows how to invest in this, and nobody is investing into it at the federal scale. And we need to put pressure on, and we need to wait it out, because it will come around. I feel confident of that, because we cannot ignore it anymore. But again, it's a really big existential question, Matt, is like, when are we going to get to that point? And God, I hope we have not normalized this and feel like these are normal events. What we saw in LA, totally, it's the new normal. That's a terrible, terrible time, paradigm to be in. We need to get over this and understand that now is the time to act. We can do things better, but it will take all of us. As Greg said, all of us across all sectors of society need to be involved in this if we need to make the change that we want to see happen. Thanks, Matt. Good question.
Hi, everyone. Dave Strohmeyer, Missoula County Commissioner. One question I oftentimes get is, what is the evacuation plan for the Rattlesnake, Petty Creek, 9 Mile, Grant Creek, the list goes on. So the question my table came up with here is, and I think this is a question for Adriane, what are the pros and cons of being highly prescriptive in terms of evacuation planning?
It's like we've had this conversation before, huh? When I mentioned that, probably the biggest question I get is about evacuations, and the biggest expectation that I think people have is that there is this predefined step-by-step evacuation plan for every single drainage in the county, and that just can't be the case. in that we don't live in an environment where we have a single hazard coming from one direction that always behaves the same way. I'm referencing tsunami evacuation routes. So we have to be nimble, and we have to be prepared to ask the public to do things that they may not think that they need to do in order to deal with the situation as it's presenting itself. We've seen fires run downhill. That's not how they typically operate. They normally like to run uphill. But in those situations, we need the public we need to have a trust with the public so that they are ready to receive emergency alerts and prepared to follow those directions, because those conditions on the ground as they exist in that moment are going to dictate how we're going to deal with population protection. And so as much as I would love to say that, yep, here's the plan, turn to your appendix for your drainage, and this is exactly what it is, it is common sense. If you live in a one-way in, one-way out, the way that you got home is the way that you're going to get out, and that's probably going to ring true as far as how we're going to ask you to evacuate in a wildfire scenario. But there may be situations where that evacuation route is not tenable, and we may ask you to do something else. And that's where we need to continually build that level of trust, that we're relying on those incident commanders who understand fire behavior, who understand our fuels, who understand where we are in the fire season, because a fire is going to behave differently today than it is on August 30th, and it's going to behave differently at 5 o'clock at night versus 5 o'clock in the morning. And so we need to have that trust with our community, that we're working with professionals that understand fire behavior to help indicate when and where an evacuation is appropriate and how quickly we need to do that.
Hello, I'm Dick Clemo. I am a resident of Patty Canyon. I've been 45 years in the canyon. I've watched it triple in size. People mostly that have moved into the canyon are not from Montana. They probably shouldn't own forest lands. The best way to get rid of, best way to mitigate, in my mind, for fire concerns is catastrophic fires and fuels. And it takes about 10 years to get someone from Texas comfortable with burning their Christmas tree. But the safest time for them to do that is in the middle of the winter. Some years ago, I think about 10, the state got wise and said, we need to get people to burn in the wintertime, and created a brand new program that allows, with permits and appropriate meteorological conditions, to burn in the winter, except in one wise county in the state of Montana, and that county is ours. And there are days in the winter, we have big air problems here, but there are days in the winter and weeks in the winter where you don't go outside because the air outside is going to be in North Dakota in an hour. And these guys here at my table can't speak. They're with the federal government, and if they speak, they could get deported. But there have been discussions. There have been discussions about opening Missoula County to burning in the winter and educating people to getting rid of these fuels that we're worried about. So I don't know what it's going to take to get to the health department or get this discussion going, but we should get on it.
I guess the question is, what do we do?
What's with the health department? We don't have a health department person.
Here we go.
I will say that the collaboration that goes into the Community Wildfire Protection Plan is a place where we can have that conversation and need to be having that conversation. A while back, we did have a collaborative group that met outside that planning process and continued meeting. And we had the health department and the health board in those conversations. And that we need to get back to that.
Yeah, and I will just say that it is a continual process, right? As we look at how do we increase the pace and scale of prescribed fire, and weigh that with the very real geographical challenges that we have in this valley for air quality. And I think, to Karen's point, those conversations have occurred in the past and continue, and there's room for improvement, and we're confident that we've got the right people at the table to continue those conversations, but it's a process and it's a balance with our air quality.
And I don't want to speak for Missoula County, but your question is so good because I hear it a lot at a national level in terms of how can we introduce and do more beneficial fire while at the same time negotiating EPA standards from the Clean Air Act, which was intentionally written for anthropogenic sources of industrial emission. And what we're talking about here is prescribed burning from non-industrial sources of emission. And so just very recently, as in the past 2 years, are they starting to have evolved conversations and actual MOUs between EPA and the federal land management agencies to have bigger conversations of rules of exception for types of prescribed burning, knowing that it is non-industrial. How do you negotiate that? It takes years and years to go through that minutia. But they are getting there, realizing that this needs to be addressed, not just in places like Missoula, but across the country if what we are recognizing is more fire needs to happen. It's a great question.
Yeah, you're going to get all four of us on this, I guess. But I want to chime in, too, because I think it's super important. From a prescribed fire standpoint, the southeastern United States burns way more than anywhere else in the U.S. It's just embedded in their culture. In fact, there it's a situation where if the federal agencies aren't proactive enough about burning their lands, citizens take it into their own hands and they say, okay, you're not going to burn it, I'm going to burn it. And so there needs to be kind of an acceptance and an understanding that that is part of smart fire management, is keeping a regular rotation of prescribed fire. Interestingly enough, we have actually, I feel like, a fairly open community here. There's the Montana-Idaho Airshed Group, and then in terms of the Weather Service and their participation in weather forecasting for prescribed burning, I feel like we have a very good community in this area working on that. And so I think there's a lot of potential to get more prescribed burning. The other element that I was going to reference with the Southeast is that they've had a prescribed fire training center in the Southeast for years and years, and we are trying in the last couple of years to get a Western prescribed fire training center stood up. And in fact, I believe there was something here in Missoula not too long ago that was part of that training effort. So we're trying to get more prescribed fire practitioners and more of that work on the ground.
Hi, Craig Stahlberg. It seems like 2 to 5 years ago, there was some pretty open debate within Missoula and the Missoulian on the prescribed burning. Those who said, yes, this is the way we should be managing it. Others that said, absolutely not. We should be resorting back to the let it run when it runs type of an approach. And has there been any reconciliation of that? Do we actually have an agreed upon procedure within the Forest Service on what proactive land management means?
I'll try to take that, although, again, being from Forest Service research, I'm not sure how well I can represent policy, broadly speaking, but our agency also has to be responsive to the political environment that we operate in, right? And so that's what makes it challenging, I think, to always be moving in the same direction with that kind of stuff. The degree to which something like prescribed burning is accepted gets back to what Kimmy said about a sort of social cultural paradigm shift. So I will say, from a science perspective, I think there's plenty of evidence that prescribed burning, having regular low to moderate intensity fire, at least in our dry forest ecosystems, which is what's prevalent around here at the low to mid elevations, there's plenty of science to support that that is a smart way to manage these landscapes with respect to fire. Whether it's putting ignitions on the ground through prescribed fire or managing active wildfires to kind of allow low to moderate intensity fires to do good work on the landscape, I think that has to be part of a smart fire management policy. And from a policy perspective, we have all the tools in our federal agencies needed to do that. It's just that from season to season, depending on what the direction is from our agency leadership and above, sometimes we're not encouraged to do that kind of work. I'll put it that way.
Last question here.
Thank you. Melody Cunningham. I know a couple of you, I think, helped to get HB 136 passed, which is a bill that will allow some insurance break for doing fire and hail and other mitigation. I wonder if you could speak to that.
I can't speak to the specifics of that bill in particular, and I don't know if others can as well, but the financial incentives provided through taxes or tax credits or insurance breaks or reductions, I think is just a demonstration that the insurance providers, we call it the risk transfer market, is recognizing the scale of increasing risk across the board for all hazards. So very importantly, when you think through what is insurance, it is pooled risk, meaning risk across the board for all policyholders is pooled together and is shared and distributed. We as policyholders here in Montana will pay for hazard-related damages in Florida, whether it's wildfire or hurricane or sea level rise. It's all shared and all distributed between policyholders. It is also risk transfer in that sense. So again, through the spreading and sharing of risk, is how we all get coverage, essentially. We are paying for the increased rates. You may see it in your car policies. It doesn't necessarily have to be homeowners insurance because it's all pooled. The LA fires will affect my car insurance, if you can kind of recognize it that way. And similarly, insurance, very importantly, is not risk reduction. It is a price signal of the risk already on the ground. And this is really important when you think about the role of insurance, in that it in itself will not be the solution here. It is just transferring that risk, and it is a reflection of the risk that's already there. And what the insurance providers need to see is upfront proactive mitigation in order to bring down that overall risk profile. So in terms of them offering a reduction, it's their, it's their olive branch, essentially, trying to incentivize action on this. I think it's I don't want to say that a reduction in your coverage is a sustainable, likely trajectory for us to be on given increasing climate hazards. What we are hoping to have is a retainment of coverage because of the scale of the risk and at the pace with which it's increasing. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about the specifics of the bill or anything, but good question.
I think we're at the end here. Thanks a lot to our panel of all-stars up here. We learned some great things. Thanks also to Silk Road Catering for providing such great food, and the Missoula Public Library for providing this wonderful space for us. Our next forum topic is still under development, so keep tuned to our website and our social media channels, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.